All right, everyone, this is our first panel of the day. I'm here with author and professor David Krieger. Am I pronouncing that right, David? It's
Yes.
Eager, right? Krieger, right. Who is from here actually, but where are you today, David?
I live in Switzerland, near Lucerne, central Switzerland.
How are you liking Lucerne in comparison to where you're from over here? You're from the States.
Yeah. I grew up in Las Vegas, went to school in Chicago and in San Francisco, and then moved to Switzerland about 40 years ago.
Oh, okay. That's a long time. Are you back here often, or no? Not so.
No, I'm not. I do have family still in the West, but I hardly get over anymore.
Do you wish you were back here at this point? I mean,
well, do you want my honest opinion?
Like not right now.
No, I love America. America is a very exciting place. Of the conflicts that America is now dealing with and going through is something that the whole world is going to face in the future. And so why not fight it out in America and settle it then so that we can become, again, a model for how the future of civilization has to go. I hope.
That's a good way to think of it. That's an interesting way to think of it, right? So we're sort of a demo for what might happen in the rest of the world. We may as well hash things out here before they bleed over to the rest of the world. I like that one. Yeah, I guess.
You're on the front.
Yeah, I guess we got to make sure that we get it right over here. So, thanks for joining me, number one. So for everyone not familiar, so David is co-author of a forthcoming book called Hacking Digital Ethics. I think it's a really interesting title. It's a very interesting, broad title. There's no subtitle, right? Am I correct about that?
No.
Yeah, no subtitle. And so before we get into this book, you've written a lot of other books around network theory. Is that good language? Is that right?
Yeah, our topic for many years has been a theory of social communication. How does society tick? And society ticks, as you said before, when people start sharing with each other and communicating. And so we've been investigating that for a long time. And then we got involved with network theory because, and by that I mean actor network theory. I don't mean social network theory or computational network theory. I mean what Bruno Latour has publicized in many works, actor network theory, where the system becomes human again, and you don't just have anonymous systems running the world, you have people with technology together who build networks. And these socio-technical networks, which is what we live in, these are the basic social unit today. Well, in the future too, when we move into a global network society, it's not the nation state. The nation state is losing importance and is almost always doing the wrong thing, whereas people are networking together globally to achieve their ends, whether in education or healthcare or scientific research, and also in many global governance institutions, which are taking more and more the lead in political affairs as well.
Right. So, okay, so I was gonna ask you to define active network theory versus social network, but I think you sort of broke it down a bit there. So I guess I'm trying to figure out a good way to make this easy to digest for a lot of folks. So this new piece that you're publishing, that you've been working on, Hacking Digital Ethics, like where did that start? What brought sort of you and Andrea to talk about hacking digital ethics? Does ethics needs to be hacked? Is ethics a static discipline? I mean, why is this title necessary outside of being a really sexy hashtag?
Well, we decided to become hackers because we couldn't be critical. We couldn't be, the standard way that social scientists or philosophers or people in general try to identify problems in society and who and what is causing them and how to correct them runs in the Western world for about 200 years now under the name of critique. And critique started with, well, Karl Marx in a big way, who criticized capitalism and pointed the way toward a solution through the workers taking over control of the means of production. Feuerbach criticized religion, Nietzsche criticized everything, and Freud criticized our way of thinking about ourselves as though our ego consciousness was somehow in charge of things. And so we have a whole tradition of critique, and critique in recent years has entirely become a part of the standard moral discourse in our society.
Sure.
It's always the same old story. It's the capitalists or the elite with black hats, and it's the workers with the white hats. And the appeal is either to the people to revolt, which doesn't work because the people are so invested in the system that they do not revolt except in extreme circumstances, or the appeal is to the government to somehow socialize, like Noam Chomsky recently says, well, the government has to socialize the banks if we want to get rid of capitalist financial exploitation. And so you have these two options.
Did he say that recently?
Yes, new book. He's an amazing
right.
We don't have to talk about him. Anyway, this critique was not an option for us. Critique is going after the guys with the bad hats who are somehow in power and manipulating everything. But we know for a long time that's not how power works. Power works in everything. Everybody's participating. Everybody's joining in the way power functions in society. And so that's one of our critiques of privacy, by the way. We make the point in our book that privacy is actually in cohorts with the power situation at the moment, but that we can get back to that later. But the idea—
I think that's a good one. I agree with you. Keep going. Though.
Yeah, good. You're the only person who does. Most people were crazy. But anyway, I think the hack was an opportunity to look into moral discourse, especially the moral discourse of digital ethics, how it's being done, what is being said, why, what function that fulfills in society, and we discovered this whole system of moral discourse, which consists of not only critique, it consists of the philosophical mythology of humanism, the human nature, which gives us certain values and norms, apparently for all time. For example, scandal media scandalization is an important part of our current day moral discourse.
Yeah.
And this whole thing builds a system, and we set out to breach that system, as a hacker does, with tools that we developed from state-of-the-art social theory. Yeah. And that was our exploit kit. And with our exploit kit, we breached this system of digital ethics, the way it's being done, and we discovered that it's all bad code. It's just not an ethics for the digital world. It's an ethics. It's an ethics for a society which we're leaving, namely the Western industrial society. And it takes over the norms of Western industrial society and just applies them. It's applied ethics. Takes over the norms of Western industrial society, a society which no longer actually is viable, and applies that to all digital technologies across the board. And so we felt that we had to hack into that, and we had to redesign, as a hacker would, redesign ethics.
When you say that you couldn't critique earlier, do you mean the, per the academy, there was no avenue to critique, ethics in itself, because this isn't, because so many things are just understood to be true, especially from, I think when we think about the individual, for instance, I know you and I have had, recent talks about this. Is it a general understanding that, all ethic should be specific to the individual, and that guide, policy and case law, which I think, guides a lot of the change management, for lack of better words, in our society? Are you saying that we've been so consistent in how we think about individuals and communities over the course of the past 200 or so years that it is, well, I guess not impossible because you all are doing it, but that it's increasingly difficult to that have a critique of any sort of the system as it exists?
Well, if you look what's been published recently under the rubric of critique, a critique of digital society, critique of the digital transformation. For example, you have a book called The Platform Society, a Dutch media scientist, or you have the famous Surveillance Capitalism.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
And
that's very famous right now.
These are typical examples of critique, and they all don't appeal to a future which is at all cognizant of the digital transformation. What they do is simply try to stop the transformation.
Explain the transformation, like what they, or you're probably going there anyway, but so what are they missing about the coming transformation, or about the transformation that we're existing in? Like what's short-sighted about their critique?
Okay, maybe I have to back up a little bit, and
sure.
And first of all, thank you for participating in Personal Data Day. Let's talk a little bit about personal data.
First that's a good one. Yeah.
First of all, data isn't just bits and bytes. It's bits and bytes with meaning. So that's information. So we're talking about personal information. And then the second word there is the person. And what is a person? A person is a social construction. We are not born persons. We are born into a society. And the society tells us, more or less, what kind of persons we can become, what kind of freedom we have, what kind of opportunities we have in life, how we see ourselves, how we have to behave toward women, for example, or toward superiors, for example. All that makes, all these roles that we play, that makes up our person. And the word itself is a mask. It's for a role that you play in the theater. And so a person is actually, what we mean by a person is actually a certain kind of information used in certain ways. Now, when society changes, the information that makes a person up and the way that a person uses this information to identify themselves, to navigate through society and life in all ways, that changes. And this is what the problem is today in digital ethics. People are experiencing these changes. For example, information that before was not at all relevant socially. Right. My surfing behavior, everything I buy, everything I sell, everything, all this information is now being used. You know, that's the famous tracking and profiling or whatever else they call that. And this information is being used in ways that in the old society, the industrial society, was not. And this changes what it means to be a person. And I think this makes a lot of people nervous and anxious. And a lot of this is being discussed under privacy, the value of privacy, which is so important today, although it's regulated by law everywhere and shouldn't be an ethical concern. I mean, if you have law, you don't need ethics. But it's something that in ethics is very much discussed, I think, precisely because the value of privacy is being contested. It's being contested by a digital world in which all your personal information, and that means much more than you ever before had available, is now available to others, and they're doing things with it. They're offering you personalized products and services. Not just consumer goods, but in education, in healthcare, in all different aspects of life. Your personal data is now being used in ways that before it never was. And these ways are interesting because they make the person into part of a network. You know, when my personal data is being used by Facebook or whatever to create and offer personalized products and services, then I am no longer a passive consumer. I am an active prosumer. I am contributing to the creation of value. And this is
that language that you all are using in the book, prosumer?
Well, this is well known already. It's basically a word for the fact that the consumer now is in a position through use of their personal information, what their needs are, what their ideas are, and everything. That all goes into the production and distribution of goods and services now. Before that didn't. So the prosumer is actually part, and not just a customer. Prosumer is actually part of the company. So it's part of the educational. The student is actually part of the.
I love where you're going there, but
educational system. This is what's changing. But
we don't look at it that way through contract law, through warrants and equity stakes. But anyway, keep going though. So
okay, well, the change
as the network,
the change is in the person. and in the kind of uses of information that the person now has in society. And this is, there's an old value and a new value which are here in conflict. The old value is privacy. That is, companies, educational institutions, health insurance companies, for example, shouldn't know everything about me.
Yeah.
You know, and it was perfectly acceptable under the old, under privacy legislation and also privacy theory to lie about those things. You know, you do not say when you apply for a job what your ethnic or religious or sexual or whatever preferences are. You just don't do it. And they're not even allowed to ask. But now everybody knows all this. And it's important that they know it because this is the second value. The old value was, no, I don't tell anybody anything about me. And that's the opposite, by the way, of what you have behind you, inclusionism. That's exclusion. The old privacy
that's totally exclusionary.
The old privacy theory was based on exclusion. You exclude others, you exclude businesses, you exclude the government from knowing about you. This is what privacy means. And you supposedly have a right to do this. And well, the new value is that you include yourself in the company, in politics, in education, and you have a say, you have a voice. And this voice consists of your personal information. That's your contribution, because out of that, these institutions, organizations, society as a whole, and your community create value. That's a new value. And these two values are in conflict. And so when we hacked digital ethics, what we hacked was that old code that said, no, you are a private individual and you're free to withhold all the information you want. But today in the global network society, that means you are hindering the process of value creation in all areas. If you don't give me... Good.
I'll keep going,
I could go on for hours.
No, well, I wanted to, and again, the reason, and thanks for joining us. I know it's late in the afternoon there, but I wanted to sort of lay the groundwork for the other conversations that we're going to be having. The next conversation right after that is with a software company who seeks to sort of disrupt some of how large platform institutions understand their interactions with these prosumers, to use the relatively new language. I know that my audience isn't using that language. As a political person, as a politician myself, I'm regularly thinking about how do we have casual conversations with a public who's unaware about the hacking that you and Andrea are bringing up in the book. And so, again, thank you. I think it's a good framework to move forward on. I'll be curious to see how fast we can get towards more inclusive world from this hyper exclusionary world. Also, like what you bring up about privacy, and I constantly am in conversations with people who have some wealth, some privilege about privacy, and I am constantly trying to tell them that the notion that we can totally rope ourselves off from each other is quite dangerous. Number one, I think humans have always survived in caucus, in tribes, and we've leveraged each other to fend off all sorts of threats, whether they would be violent threats from other animals, or violent threats from the environment around us. And I don't think that in this century or in the last 2 centuries that we've talked a lot about the power of community, the power of a network, and how we are living in this webbed society. Even before we started using this language, even the old nation state world of the 19th and early 20th century, I think we were failing to acknowledge the inherent value that proliferates from the communities with which we participate in. So I think it is high time that we hack digital ethics and hack ethics more broadly, because we've digitized everything. I think one thing I try to talk about a lot when I'm out with folks talking about data is that it's always existed. It's not just digital data, but now that there's so much that has been digitized, we have very real evidence of our existence, and we can start to make arguments that we wouldn't otherwise. The pushback I get, though, For instance, I'm on a board that's planning World Pride, the big LGBT Pride event that happens biannually. Last year was here in New York. Next year it'll be in Copenhagen. And one thing that we're trying to push out as a policy platform is that we want more countries to start collecting more gender and sexuality data, and not just gender from a male-female standpoint, but those who identify as intersex and transgender and you name it. And there are some very real fears, especially in countries like Chechnya, which has a new documentary out about how they're using personal data to target these minority communities with violence and jail time. And so folks are like, what do we do if we collect more data? We'll be playing right into dictators and terrorists' hands. And on the other hand, in societies that are more tolerant and even more accepting, it's very necessary to collect this information to be able to better provide products and services, whether we're talking about insurance services or healthcare services or you name it. So having this complex web of who's included and how, who's on the sort of maturity index or maturity incline of participation is, I think, sort of the human rights struggle of our time. But ending on that word, on that phrase, human rights, I think I'd like to, in the next, we only have about 10, 15 minutes left. Everything that you said puts our conversations around human rights into question about, again, as you said, what is a person? What are human rights? If we're looking at individuals as a part of the network, how are you and Andrea in the book talking about human rights or talking beyond human rights?
Well, to begin with, we think the current discussion about human rights is something that arose after the 2 world wars in Europe.
Yeah.
And how you have to understand it from that experience of dictatorship, totalitarianism, destruction,
Sure.
And what we now have as human rights is a reformulation of the Enlightenment, European Enlightenment, Western Enlightenment idea of the autonomous rational subject, who the individual, the rational individual who makes free decisions and should in this freedom be protected from authoritarian governments, police control, and so on. And privacy was used as a right in order to ensure that. And we should be clear that in places where there's no rule of law, where actually a civil war is going on, then of course in war you need to disguise yourself. You need you need good camouflage if you're going to make it through the day. And that, in those situations, privacy is necessary. You won't get through the day if the government knows everything about you.
Right.
And so we're talking about societies like our own, where the transition to a global network society is built upon rule of law. If you don't have rule of law, then you have to get out there and make that fight and win that war and establish rule of law. But after that, you have to address the forces which are forming social order in today's world, and those are largely determined by what we'll call digital technologies, by the fact that our communication and our way of cooperating with each other has dramatically changed by these technologies, and we should look to see what the values built in to network communication are, because I think these are the new human rights.
But when you say value, just expand on that a bit. What do you?
Well, we offer as an alternative, or even replacement for the current human rights, which are really based in Western industrial society.
Yeah.
We offer different rights. One of them is connectivity. Connectivity is a right.
People have the right to connectivity.
Yeah, you have, and if you don't, that's a norm. I mean, I have 2 laptops, a tablet, an iPhone, 2 smart televisions, and 3 computers. So why? Well, because this is a value. This is a norm.
Yeah.
You want to be connected, and you want to be connected everywhere all the time. Connectivity, and if you think of the Internet of Things, then everything around me is going to be connected. This connectivity is needed for information to flow. The flow of information, the free flow of information, that's a second, shall we say, human right or social right.
Sure.
And if you don't have that, then value cannot be created. And this is one of our arguments against privacy. Privacy does not want the free flow of information. And so the consumer remains a consumer and does not become a prosumer, and missing an important opportunity and a chance for development. Another is communication and participation. If you're connected, if information flows, then you're standing in a position to create information, to communicate, to have your voice be heard, or as you say, inclusionism. Inclusion is a value. Exclusion is not a value anymore. Inclusion is the value, and that means participation, communication. You participate in your community, in your life, in your education, in your healthcare. You become an e-patient, an empowered patient, or you become
E is for empowered.
Educational career, you know. And so those are connectivity, free flow of information, participation, communication, transparency is another one. You have to know where information is coming from, what it's worth, and how you're supposed to use it. This is something.
Connectivity, transparency. Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that the media are simply not doing. The media are involved in a whole different game, namely an economy of attention, and that's why the media.
That's a term in the venture capital world. The attention economy is
Yeah, the media today are absolutely useless. I have about 10 different sources of information, and after everything happens, I make an average of all 10 sources and figure out, well, that is probably a little bit near the truth.
Sure. Right.
But otherwise, nothing in the media today has any other value than what can it generate on advertising money. That's it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a shame. And so
it totally is a shame.
Important. And finally, flexibility is another value which networks have. Namely, networks are not like systems are. Networks are not structured, finished, closed. They're open-ended. They're changing all the time. Every time a new actor becomes involved, whether that's a person or a technology, it changes everything. And so networks are very quickly adaptable. And the old institutions of the industrial society were not quickly adaptable. So those are the values.
Connectivity, transparency, flexibility.
Yeah.
All rights of the network.
Participation and flow.
And what are the others?
Yeah, participation, communication, transparency, flexibility, flow of information, and connectivity.
Right.
And we say if you go with those, if you think them through, then you have a better basis for ethical and regulatory discourse than you do on the basis of the human rights.
Yeah, and I think it drives our incentives to ensure that those are available to proliferate in places that are sort of less stable. Yeah, I mean, it's.
Sure, that's what makes a difference. In a lot of these countries where the rule of law is not yet established, for example, in the Middle East, remember the Arab Spring, it was the new values, connectivity, flow of information, participation, transparency was the new values that brought about forces for social change. Even if they were squashed in the end, they're still there.
Yeah, I think we're in early days of this sort of war for what rights are, and I wonder if that's sort of our earliest example. I need to think about that some more. I haven't thought about it much, but interestingly enough, I've spent sort of the past few weeks, post coronavirus, post the murder of George Floyd, and sort of the proliferation of all this new Black Lives Matter activism, which we were doing years before, but I remember, people thinking it was a dirty word or a dirty phrase, but now corporate leaders as much as political leaders are eager to have conversations around what inclusion actually looks like, and they're looking for justification to pursue inclusion in more than just a sort of feel-good way. And we've been trying to identify data points to show why not only is it a feel good, but there's sort of, you know, financial incentives. I think Citigroup just published a paper, the bank, a paper about a few days ago that said systemic racism can be accredited with about $16 trillion of GDP that's missing. But aside from that, I think the more powerful argument here is one that you're making, which is, you know, more of a moral conversation, that even as we're having some of these conversations at the corporate and political level, I don't hear a lot of clergy, whether they fit into one of the Abrahamic categories or Buddhism or you have it, talking about the network, the very tangible, real, visible, you know, technological network of humanity having some moral right to things like connectivity, flow, flexibility, transparency, and it being a derivative of their intrinsic value as a participant of this ever-evolving dynamic community with which they fit into. And so I hope that, you know, conversations that are had after this one that you and I are having, we'll try to publish this as broadly as possible, but also, you know, folks that get a hold of your book, that they're starting to think about these conversations as they communicate to their constituencies about a moral regard. I will say, just here in my community alone, I talk with a group of Christians and Jewish thought leaders who lead different sorts of congregations about this issue in particular. And my real objective, outside of finding time to drink beer and tea every now and again when they're available to, and I've been surprised at how many pastors are available to have like 3 or 4 beers with you, as opposed to just one and get out of the way. But my objective has been to try and see if they're available to tell more stories around the ideas of the ethic that you're talking about. And so my hope is that that's where we start to go in the near and far future. So just one more time, can you run down those what is it, 6 different principles?
Well, we call them the values.
The values. How many values and what are they?
Network society. Okay, first of all, there's connectivity,
Yep.
flow of information,
Yep.
communication,
Yep.
participation,
Yep.
transparency.
Yep.
Authenticity is one I haven't mentioned yet. Namely, you have to, if you're in the net, you have to say who you are. I mean,
Okay.
you're not going to be trusted. You're not going to be trusted if you don't out yourself for who you are.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. You talked before about communities. You know, from
Yeah.
the early ages on, humans have formed communities. They did that on the basis of trust. That is, on the basis of knowing who the other guy is.
They had to know you, right?
So without knowledge of who the other guy is, there's no trust. This is also a problem we have with privacy. And finally, flexibility means that your network can change quickly. And although I don't like the word adapt, is maybe a good word. You can adapt to a constantly, ever more quickly changing situation.
Yeah.
You don't have to be afraid of innovation.
Right. Afraid of, the change. I think, I've changed so much over the course of the past 10 years alone, just because of, you know, so many new sort of identities and participants coming, you know, out to participate sort of in the world. So, you know, we're almost at our end, but I do want to say one quote that we use often on inclusionism. We do a radio show here locally, a FM radio show, also called Inclusionism. And the language that we like is that, you know, individuals are at their best when they identify with the community. I think, you know, they are affirmed that way, but also that communities are only, keyword, at their best when they identify all of their individuals. And the objective there is really to talk about how constant identification and constant evolution of that identification or flexibility in that identification is necessary in order for the web, the community, to use the most plain terms, to make sure that it is as true as it can be, that it is as robust and modern as it can be. And so with that, I hope that that this book from you and Andrea is well received in all sorts of communities and translated into a bunch of different languages, because we definitely have to start having this conversation in the halls of leadership across every one of our, siloed nation states, which will hopefully then bring down all those borders between these different sovereigns. So, or sovereign states, I should say. But yeah, I love it. I love what you all are doing. I appreciate it, and it feels like we have a long way to go. But seeing this newest generation, like I'm an old millennial, I guess. Today is my 39th birthday, but a lot of 18-year-olds think I'm a really old man, which is ridiculous, at least to me. But the Gen Z group and these newer kids who are even younger than them, the way they interact in the world is totally different. And I remember being 20-ish thinking, everyone will be like this, we'll plateau out, everyone will be like us from here on out. But I had no idea sort of what would change how we use communications technology to sort of change our culture. So so I'm hopeful about what will be in the near far future. Yeah,
I am too. I think you only have two choices. You can be pessimistic or you can be optimistic, and it's no fun being pessimistic.
Totally, right. So I'm gonna stick with optimistic. But so we're at our time. Again, David, thank you. Give Andrea our best. I'll try to do another follow-up with her at some point in the near future, sure. Just to get some of her individual thoughts. But again, love what you all are doing, and love the evolution from the old work, the network theory stuff, into sort of transforming how we're going to think about ethics going forward. I'm definitely going to bring this up at the World Pride Forum to have every elected official that comes in, and we will have folks there from about 70 different countries, to have them start thinking about what these new rights are, and how we need to toil away to make them inalienable. So
great.
Thanks again.
Thank you, James.
All right.
Good to be here.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
All right.